Welcome, everybody. My name is Brittany Ramsey, and I am the Region H Chair. We serve Ohio, Indiana, and Northern Kentucky. And tonight we are going through our next workshop in our Region H Advisor Development Training Program. And this workshop is titled Recruiting and Motivating Volunteers. This is a big topic in our fraternity and even beyond and outside of APO on how, especially in a virtual environment, to continue recruiting volunteers, not only but also focusing on motivating those volunteers once we've recruited them or once they've signed on to help out. How do we keep people kind of chugging along, especially in a virtual environment? And even once we get to in-person events again, how do we continue that motivation? So tonight we'll go over a couple tips for recruitment and for motivation, and then we'll dive into some scenarios that we can get some real-world practice in for our current advisors or potential advisors on this call. To start with, we're going to talk about recruiting volunteers and how to kind of start from square one. If you are a chapter advisor trying to help a chapter recruit some new advisors to the group or advisor candidates, this really falls under the role of the advisory chair and even the local section chair. But sometimes we're not fortunate to have a current advisory chair that's helping recruit new volunteers, or we've lost an advisory chair and we need to start recruiting somebody to fill that role as well at the same time. So it's really something that advisors need to have in their repertoire of skills to bring to a chapter's table down the road so that they can help kind of fill that funnel of volunteers and help bring in potential advisor candidates for the students to interview and get to know. Here are some tips on finding local alumni volunteers. First and foremost, you can always ask local or the current students in that chapter to see if they know any local graduates. A lot of times, some of the older students will already know if they had a big in their family or a friend that was a senior as well that has graduated and still living in the area. We always recommend shying away from advising your own home chapter, but some of those students can help point that recent grad to another nearby chapter as well to kind of remove them from their alma mater, but still give them a role as an advisor at a nearby chapter. So that would be my first starting place that I would recommend. Next, we have a Region H alumni chair, and some of our sections even have alumni or section alumni chairs. And those individuals can help you in this recruitment process. They can help broadcast or market the need for a new advisor and help pull listservs from the national office. So we can get lists of alumni by zip code and by a list of their home chapters as well. I would highly recommend, if you are serving as a chapter advisor and you are needing to fill a couple positions on the chapter advisory team and the president is asking for your help, I would touch base with the section chair, but I would also reach out to any existing chapter advisors that maybe serve at local chapters. Hopefully you've gotten to know them as your section structures have built over time. You can even reach out to local volunteers or section staff members that you know, and hopefully together as a team, you can start finding some local volunteers that are willing to serve as potential advisor candidates. Section chairs are a phenomenal asset to have on the local level to finding out if they know any recent graduates that still live by or which volunteers are looking for a role. I know that's not the case in most of our sections where we're struggling to find new volunteers, but we do have a couple sections where we have a surplus and we have a lot of people ready and willing to serve. So if you're a chapter advisor and you know maybe the advisory chair has to move or took a new job and you know there's going to be a hole to fill, or they are still searching to fill one of the advisory roles, you can reach out to your section chairs and all of the other people that we've listed, existing students and fellow chapter advisors at other schools, and brainstorm together a good pool of advisor candidates. If we ever have a chapter come to us, especially students, where they're looking for chapter advisors or section chairs, like we can't find anybody in the city, I always try to stray away from just giving the chapter one option. I always like them having the opportunity to choose, to interview, even to add multiple people if they want to, instead of just saying this is the only person we could find and just giving them a body to add to their advisory list. We want to stray away from doing that anymore and really allowing the chapters to interview and approve their advisors and set their list of expectations with them to make it more of a fluid process and meet the chapter needs. Next, you could always market over social media. All of our sections now have social media accounts, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. So that can help get the word out if we're looking for advisors in a certain area. And that helps on top of chapter marketing, because I know the chapter students could be marketing on their pages that they need advisors, but the section pages typically have a bigger audience and they can reach more alumni than just a single chapter page would have. And then lastly, we have a monthly digital newsletter that comes out now on the region level, and it goes out to alumni, current students and chapters, and also advisors. So it could help us pull some alumni that aren't in roles yet if they hear that a certain chapter or two in a section is looking for advisors. I also recommend adding to the meeting notes. So I know that you're, as a current advisor, probably talk the most with exec members, but I would suggest that the chapter president add that into their meeting slides. Say that, let the chapter know that you're looking for new advisors, let them know what positions need fulfilled specifically. Is it a community advisor, or do they need suggestions on faculty advisors? Current students are going to be the biggest help, especially for finding that faculty and staff advisor. Does anyone have any questions on how to find local alumni or tips to give a chapter? I know a couple of you on the call are brand new advisors, and the chapter was going through this exact process this year, trying to reach out to their current advisors to fill those other roles in their section chair, and trying to cast a wide net to find advisor candidates. And two of you happen to be those candidates that came through that process. Okay, next, we're going to talk about motivating our volunteers. This is something that is huge for not only myself as the region chair and our section chairs, but also at the chapter and advisor level, especially if you are in the role as advisory chair or just trying to motivate the rest of your advisory team, like we'll talk about in a few slides. But when you're trying to motivate alumni, it's really important to get back to common ground and understanding, which is part of our education process on conflict resolution as well. And you can circle back by explaining why we're volunteering and why we're here, and getting brothers excited again to be a part of the volunteer network that we have and all the opportunities that APO has to offer in this lifelong commitment that we have to APO. You could explain the special needs of the chapter if there's something that they need fulfilled, as far as maybe specifically just the scouting and youth service role, or maybe they need a community advisor that's versed in finances. They need somebody to help with chapter finances, and that's why you're reaching out to this specific alum. Or on the flip side of things, maybe they really struggle with Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure, and you're pulling and reaching out to alumni volunteers that you know are skilled in those areas. So if you can explain what the specific needs of the chapter are, and there's a need that an alum can specifically fulfill, sometimes that's easier than just trying to recruit somebody without really giving them a specific task that they need to fulfill. Next, this kind of goes hand in hand, but showcasing where the skills of this advisor could really be of use. How could they benefit the chapter, and how could they be of use? I think a lot of alumni volunteers want to feel helpful and want to feel like they are a vital part of the chapter and belong there, just like a student does when they take on leadership roles. They want to feel like they're making a difference, and the same goes for alumni volunteers. So if you can help them see that and showcase really how their skills could be of use, it will lead to a more motivated alumni volunteer joining on that chapter team. Never be afraid to ask for help. We have several sections out of our 6 sections that have gone through a drought of volunteers, whether it just wasn't having a section structure in place for decades, or having anybody recruit new volunteers and keep them organized. So if that ever gets to the case, what's happening on the chapter level, or if it's happening in your section, please reach out for help. Reach out to your section chair, reach out to myself or our region staff members and ask for help. We've got an alumni development chair and an advisor development chair to be of support and to be of use to all of you on the local levels, so that we don't get to the point where a chapter doesn't have any advisors on file, or they're missing an advisory chair, or they've lost both their faculty advisors, and now the university is needing them to have somebody signed up ASAP. So always ask for help. Don't wait till it gets to the last minute, especially if you're one of the only advisors that are still active and engaged. If you are having issues with the current group of advisors, even if it's a bunch of you on paper and it doesn't seem like anybody is motivated and they're not really connecting with the students or getting everybody engaged, it's possibly time to bring in new volunteers to bring new energy, new perspective, new light, and a voice to the advisory team. And that's something you can suggest to the chapter president. You could set up a private meeting to have with the section chair to ask their perspective and ask for their help. But sometimes we've just had advisors serving for a really long time on paper and they haven't been involved with the chapter. And we want to move away from not having effective advisory teams. That's not helping our chapters. It's not helping our sections and our region grow. And it's not helping the fraternity at the end of the day, because we need to be giving our students a full support system. That's why we ask for 4 advisors minimum. They all serve different purposes. They have different roles for the chapter to best support them and to make sure that we're not leaving our students with nobody showing up and nobody communicating with them, because that's the worst thing that we could do. As a region and as a section, we want to make sure that we're avoiding that happening with our chapters. And then lastly, you could always reach out to section chairs or region staff members, even other fellow chapter advisors, or you could lead one yourself, but maybe do a workshop or a retreat with just your advisory team, or bring in the advisors for the whole section and try to do a retreat where you bond as brothers, you become more of a team unit, you increase the communication and the working relationships with everybody so that you can best serve the students. I just want to add a caveat to this. You want to make sure that as much as you want a team bond and form team unity, that is phenomenal, but you also all have to maintain individual relationships with the exec and with the students in the chapter so that it doesn't form kind of an us versus them thing. You don't want chapters versus the advisors as a whole. You want to make sure that you're all unbiased individual mentors for the chapter as well. Any questions on motivating? Okay, next I included this chart here for motivation. It just shows all the different facets of motivating different people. And I think this can relate back to APO and our fraternity structure of volunteers pretty well. But all of these different facets of motivation are helpful tools and tips when you're dealing with alumni volunteers and advisors especially. You want to make sure that you're setting targets or goals, giving specific tasks, especially for task-oriented people that want to feel like they're accomplishing something. There's also people that want to make sure that their goals are aligned, that they understand what the chapter's needs and goals are, and what they're willing to do as an alumni volunteer aligns with those goals, and they want to help the chapter achieve them. There are people that want to feel engaged. They want to feel like they are a part of something, that they have a family with the chapter. They're there to be an advisor and a teacher for them and a mentor. And there are a lot of alumni volunteers that thrive when they are given credit, when they are recognized for the work they're doing with the chapters. And so understanding everybody's different motivating factors and what makes them motivated for the roles that they're taking on or the jobs that they have. You want to make sure that you're hitting whatever area of motivation applies to the people on your advisory team, or if it's a staff of volunteers or the advisors in a whole section. And last but not least, you want to make sure that you're always offering feedback. If you're the advisory chair, especially, maybe setting up an annual meeting with the rest of the advisors on your team, or setting up some type of retreat where you're all sharing feedback with each other in a healthy manner, in a healthy setting. And then also for our chapters, that's something that we should be asking them to do with their advisory team every year, giving feedback, making sure the expectations are clear or refreshed for the next year, and evaluate and revise what happened last year. So I thought this chart does a great job of showing all these different things, but it really boils down to understanding the individuals on your advisory team, what motivates them personally, and what's going to help set them up for success with the chapter that we're recommending them to if they're a new advisor. I wanted to open the floor with you all today and start with a couple questions. I am curious, in your different roles that you have in the fraternity, a couple of you are brand new advisor candidates, and some of you have been advisors or are serving on a section chair level. What is the biggest motivating factor for you in your role? What gets you motivated to do your job?
I'm motivated by seeing the progress that the students make, either on their own or with my guidance and the guidance of the other advisors, and also a little bit of credit.
That's great. What about you, Jackie? What motivates you in your role?
To know that I'm helping them make a difference in the community.
Yeah, that's very important. And then Rick, do you have any motivating factors in your roles that you have? I know that you're in a couple different ones right now as an advisor to an extension group and also as a section chair.
Yeah, I that seeing the aha moment, I like to call it. So when our students, I think seeing students go through their complete leadership journey, or the moment of where they've learned a tough like they've had something challenging happen and they've learned through that lesson a tough lesson through that. I think that for me is what motivates me to continue to want to work with students, especially in an advising capacity. Because like sometimes I think it's really hard as an advisor to let our students fail, but it's through watching them grow and learn as leaders and as brothers within the fraternity, those aha moments where they see why that failure happened and they're motivated to come back and rebound and really make some changes, whether that's behavioral or leadership style wise or operations wise. I think for me, that's the most exciting thing, is helping a student to like get to that point and have that reflection conversation.
Definitely, I love that. And I love the branded aha moment. I think that's a really great moment to see our chapters kind of come through any kind of conflict or challenge and come to the realization on the other side, whether it's a new idea or a new process or an answer to the question they had, at least they've come to that resolve and brought something new to the chapter. Okay, for our next question, I want to know what got you recruited into the role? What made you decide to either run for a section chair position, or what made you sign on to become a potential advisor for a chapter? What was it that got you on that kind of recruitment sales hook that made you say this was the role for me, or this encouraged you to get involved?
Well, I was on the Section H3 staff and still am, and I was looking for something a little bit more connected to the students to also do. And I've been considering advising for a little bit, and Connor, the Section H3 chair, recommended this opening for me at the Zeta Lambda chapter at the University of Toledo, and I took it.
So it was kind of like you saw a chapter need and you rose to that occasion because there was an opportunity to help a chapter.
Absolutely. And I always want to do everything I can and to help the chapters and help the students be their best selves for the fraternity, the community, the world. And I saw an opportunity to do that and would have done it anywhere, but UT is the place that I'm needed right now. So there I am.
That's awesome. And Jackie, what got you involved?
Wow. Connor asked me to interview to apply to be a potential advisor as well. And what motivated me was to give back to the chapter as much as the chapter has given me. And that is a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that feeling of wanting to give back. And UT was your home chapter, I'm assuming. So wanting to give back to the chapter that helped develop you as a leader.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you all for sharing the reasons why you got recruited and the reasoning behind your motivation or what keeps you motivated. That's super important to understand with the advisory teams you're working with, or if you're an advisory chair or a section chair helping oversee it. That's also important to know so that you can help keep your volunteers motivated and also help recruit new people. So we are going to finish out this workshop with just a few practice rounds for examples of what to do with your advisory teams. And this is really going to be more relevant the longer that you get into the role of being an advisor and potentially becoming an advisory chair one day. But the first one is a scenario where the chapter needs a new scouting and youth service advisor. So if you remember from the first workshop, becoming an APO alumni or an APO alumni advisor, you will remember the different facets of being a scouting and youth service advisor and what makes it different from the other ones when you're needing to recruit a new volunteer and what to look for. So where would you begin your search? the chapter president is coming to you and needs assistance. They have no idea where to turn. They need a brand new scouting and youth service advisor and have no idea where to start.
I can start with this one. I have direct experience on this one. So my role in achieving this is a little bit complicated because I am both the section chair, but also the extension contact, but also an advisor for the extension effort. But I really just search like scouting like opportunities or scouting orgs within, and we're in an urban setting, so Indianapolis, Indiana. So there's a lot of opportunities in terms of like scouting and youth services, but I just did a Google search and I got connected with a scouting and youth service program. So I emailed, and there was a department for volunteer outreach. And so I emailed them and I was like, hi, like this is who we are. We're looking for somebody to help support, like connect our chapter with opportunities and to support like the development of our leaders in this capacity area. Are there any current volunteers that you have within like your database or whatever that might be interested in helping and assisting us? And they got me connected with somebody who was interested. They aren't a brother, and so I'm excited to see them get further involved and learn more about our organization since they have a sorority affiliation from their collegiate career, and so I'm excited to introduce them to the world of APO specifically.
That's a perfect example, Rick. Thank you for sharing your personal experience and recent experience having to do this exact same thing. And starting with Google and looking at what's in the city surrounding you is the perfect place to start. Is much easier when you're in a metropolitan area or you have a large city next to you, but there are still so many different orgs, even in the smallest of college towns that we have in Region H. There are still so many youth organizations, even if it's not specifically scouting related. There's a lot of different things when you open kind of that can of worms. You can find so many different resources and people hopefully willing to help. Are there any other tips for helping find a scouting or youth service advisor that you would give to the chapter president? Okay, the only other thing that I would suggest is also reaching out through the schools that you have in your area. There are a lot of different elementary school systems or even Montessori school systems that have different programs they work with already. They have nonprofits that they volunteer with. And so schools sometimes can be the best way to find a list of youth service orgs in the community because they are probably already set up with them since they have a school full of young people. So you can reach out to the school systems in the areas where you have your universities and tell the chapter presidents to start touching base with them. A lot of our chapters tend to already work with local schools. They already do service projects with them. So sometimes some of their existing service project partners are people that could provide an advisor for them if they look within the rest of their organization or list of volunteers. Next, on our second scenario, this includes the following. You are the only advisor who is showing up to meetings or communicating with the students, even though there are 5 to 6 others listed on Officer Portal. Who would you reach out to regarding this issue, and how could we begin to resolve this for the chapter?
I would try to reach out to the advisory chair and see if they have any information on maybe something changed in their personal life, or they're just not interested anymore and they haven't really said anything, and maybe get some information on when was the last time they were at a meeting, and just kind of get some of that information to kind of just start gathering a picture of why this is happening, and also reaching out to the president too to ask those same questions.
Definitely, that's a really great starting point. Can I ask you a follow-up question? What would you do if you try to reach out to all the other advisors and they won't respond to you, or you can't get their contact info anymore? It's dead emails and you don't have a phone number, and the chapter president is also coming to you saying they can't reach anybody besides yourself. Then who would you go to?
Well, at that point, we just have to talk to the advisory chair about how do we really proceed with this? Do we want to if we can't get a hold of them, then, and they're not showing up, maybe just allow a certain amount of time that's like they have until this day to show up again, or else we'll have to consider maybe moving on and finding some more involved advisors. And it's a tough decision to have to make, but if they're not coming around and there's no way to communicate with them, then you're eventually going to have to start discussing that with the advisory chair and the chapter president.
Yeah, definitely. That's great tips. The only issue that might arise is if the advisory chair is one of them that isn't showing up or hasn't for years, and there's just a bunch of people on paper. And unfortunately, that's pretty common throughout our fraternity, I think, not even just this region, but this is a pretty common problem that we've had in a few of our sections where we finally get a hold of one advisor, but nobody can reach the other ones. And often it's hard to reach the advisory chair as well.
In that case, maybe then the one advisor that is showing up can consider becoming the new advisory chair if the chapter decides to elect him to it.
Yeah, that's a great first step to talk about that with the chapter president and the exec, especially if that's an advisor who's been there long enough and can serve in that role. If it's a brand new advisor and the only person showing up, the first person you should be reaching out to after discussing with the chapter is the section chair, and letting them know what's going on, because sometimes they aren't aware of the situation. Everything looks great on OP. The president hasn't brought up any issues yet without being able to reach advisors, and maybe they don't know what advisors are supposed to be doing to begin with. So the section chairs might not have that on their radar yet. And if you are a current advisor, you can reach out to them to let them know about the red flag, and the section chair can come help you throughout the obvious need to recruit maybe some new potential candidates for the chapter to reach out to. But yeah, those are all great tips, Zach. Does anybody else have any other feedback for this scenario?
I think going back to like the base presentation in terms of setting expectations with students, I think that is something that this would be a great conversation of. Maybe the student's expectation is not clear as to who should be doing what and how work should be distributed. And so I think reevaluating with the students, right, is having this one advisor meeting their expectations. Because I can also maybe say like, right, especially if the advisor is experiencing burnout and we want to avoid that, asking the students, are their expectations being met and how can we change or adapt that? If I was an advisor personally in this position, I would maybe reach out and say like, okay, I haven't attended these meetings. Like I am not able to attend these meetings this semester. Like who can attend? And really trying to just like prompt and say like, hey, like I need to be proactive and say like, I need you to attend these meetings and see what sort of comes up, because that's also a good indicator of like where people are at, because maybe they are just busy during the times that the meeting is too. And so trying to get that context as to what's prohibiting them from participating in that way, and just assuming positive intent, I think is important in this situation.
Definitely. And I love that bringing it back to the base level workshop that we had and going through that list of expectations with the students. And although this is a dire need for recruitment, and that's probably on the top of everybody's mind, that very next step needs to be going over those expectations again and figuring out what led to this. Was there a lack of communication happening for a couple of semesters? Is there a lack of advisor structure or training? Or did they just have people move away and the chapter forgot to recruit and elect new advisors? So that's a really great discussion point to have with them, and either the current advisor or the section chair can help facilitate that process, because that's a great second step after figuring out what to do with recruiting new advisors. Okay, and for our last scenario, the chapter president reaches out to you because the advisory team doesn't seem to engage with the students. They show up to everything, they're meeting their attendance expectations, but they aren't making connections with the students. They ask for your help facilitating a conversation about motivating the advisory team. How would you proceed?
I think for this one, I mean, it depends on the structure of the chapter and sort of like the operations pieces. But what I would maybe do is add into like either the pledge requirements. That's where I would start and saying like, okay, you need to interview like every advisor and X amount of advisors. to create that connection, because I think that sometimes when advisors, especially who have been around for a long time, it's hard when they just seeing so many students cycle through, whether that's they graduate or they're just lack of retention in chapters. It's hard for advisors to see students that they really bonded with leave and wanting to establish relationships with new students. And so I think really trying to integrate a system or a process where the new advisors have to intentionally get out and meet students, because that sort of begins some of those peace conversations of, hey, like we bonded over this, or can reignite that spark. Because I think that's something that I see with a lot of advisors, just that burnout of I'm tired of doing this. It's just been a long time, or the students that I really connect with have graduated, or I just don't connect with my students. And I think some of those initial conversations can really help to begin the beginning steps. Obviously, that's not the end all be all, but I think that would be a great place to potentially start.
Yeah, that is a perfect place to start. That's a great way to just open up those communications and start having those discussions about what's going on, and how maybe they can better connect with the students, but understanding where the advisors are coming from as well. Does anyone have any other tips for this kind of situation? Okay, perfect. Thank you all for your input on these 3 different scenarios. I know these will become way more prevalent when you are serving as an advisor for a few years and you've seen a couple advisors come and go. And the chapter president and definitely the exec board will be looking to your leadership as a current chapter advisor if there are holes to fill, especially if it's more on the community scouting and youth service side or even the advisory chair side. It's quite hard from the outside to try and help recruit a faculty or staff advisor, but you can still point them in the direction of your section chair, who's pretty trained on how to do that, or at least where to start and where to start looking. But I hope these scenarios helped you feel more prepared for any of these scenarios, and to start by answering those questions or starting the dialogues with the students on how to motivate advisors, how to recruit them, or where to look, so that you won't look like a deer in the headlights and you'll be able to point them in the right direction of where to start. Does anyone have any questions about recruiting or motivating volunteers specifically in the advisory board?
This is maybe just more of a question. What strategies have you seen other advisors utilize to coach? Okay, this is going to sound negative, maybe, but maybe like coach out like an advisory chair or an advisor. Because I think especially for some people who have been there for 10, 20 years, they're not meeting the chapter's needs and aren't being a positive role model for students necessarily anymore. What are some specific strategies that you've seen have been successful in helping to coach someone out of a position?
Yes, that is a great question. And that's something that's definitely happened, especially with longer term serving advisors or advisory boards as a whole. If there's several advisors that have just kind of lost that spark or the connection with the students, or they're simply not meeting the needs of the chapter anymore, even with everything that's happened this year and moving to virtual operations, I think it's brought in light to some of our holes in advisory teams across the region and across the country. But as far as coaching somebody out, or opportunities or strategies for how to approach that conversation, my first suggestion to section chairs or other chapter advisors or chapter presidents would be, if you aren't already having a process on the chapter level to interview, to elect, and do that on an annual basis, the list of chapter advisors, I highly recommend installing something like that into either your chapter bylaws or chapter policy manual, whatever you may have. And a lot of chapters sometimes have that in their bylaws and they just haven't been following it for a while, or they elect an advisor once and they let them serve for 20 years and they never have that reevaluating conversation, or they never have the conversation about revising expectations or going over what their needs are now. So if the chapter first and foremost doesn't have a process to elect their advisors annually, that's where I would recommend starting, because it kind of creates that natural process of having to quote unquote interview or evaluate the current list of advisors. And it's kind of a safe way for the chapter president to present that conversation with the current advisors and say, hey, this is a new process, a new structure for our chapter. We're going to go through this and let our chapter members decide, and really kind of put it on the chapter as a whole. So it's not the chapter president wants to kick you out, or a section chair wants to kick you out, or there's the exec board just doesn't like this one advisor. It's more we want to decide as a chapter what our expectations are for advisors, and we want to start annually reviewing all those advisors to see if they're still meeting the needs of the chapter. That can change definitely year by year. And that should be okay with advisors. This isn't a permanent role. This is a volunteer role, and every other volunteer role in the fraternity is almost either elected or appointed on a annual, if not biennial role. So chapter advisors are one of the few that I think in the last 30 years, we've kind of forgotten to continue promoting something like that. We kind of keep setting up these advisors and then leaving them on paper for 20 years. And as volunteers and as fellow advisors or section chairs or region staff members, we need to promote more of that understanding and education with our chapters to let them know that they can do that. They have that. They should feel empowered to be able to do that and really take ownership of their advisor program, and know that the advisors are there to serve and volunteer for the chapter and the chapter's wishes. So that very long-ended answer to your question is to navigate them through that process of maybe starting an annual election or discussion at a chapter meeting about their advisors, where they ask the advisors to step out of the room or in the waiting room of the Zoom call. They have a group discussion about it. They ask questions with each other. They can ask questions of the advisors and then ultimately take a vote and vote somebody as an advisor or not. And that's an easy way to kind of turn back to the advisor that you wanted to quote unquote coach out or ask to leave politely, that the chapter evaluated them and they're no longer meeting the needs of the chapter. They want to go in a different direction, or they need something different fulfilled from a new perspective. And that kind of asks that opens that conversation that they will probably need a lot of guidance and support from an outside force like a section chair to have, but it opens the floor for that conversation, I think. And then second, if they are already doing that process, they already elect them every year, and maybe the exec team or as section chair, you're nervous that they just keep voting in the same advisors. They're not really talking a lot about it, and this advisor has been around forever, so they just keep approving it and not unanimously, and no one's really discussing it. That's an opportunity as a chapter advisor, as a local volunteer, especially section chairs, for you to kind of come together with that president or whatever exec member came to you with those concerns and have a conversation with the exec and even the chapter as a whole of what expectations could be, what they could get out of an advisor. Because it could be an issue where the chapter just doesn't know, like, oh, we thought advisors were just supposed to show up to stuff, or we only really ask our faculty advisor to sign a form once a year for the university and we never hear from them. We didn't know we could ask them to come to things or to do extra stuff and help connect us to the university. So maybe if you take that step then to educate them further on what they could be getting from an advisor and what expectations they have available to set, then maybe it will spark that thought in the rest of the actives to be like, okay, we need to start asking more. We're not getting what we need from our advisors, and let's hit the table discussion for interviewing and hopefully recruiting some new perspectives. Does that help answer your question, Rick?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
No problem. And sometimes you could just get the call from one of your chapters where the chapter is trying to vote out an advisor or ask them to stop coming to meetings, and they're not really taking the hint or listening through it. And that's where you have to kind of have that tough conversation, alumni to alumni, and explain what the chapter is wanting and trying to say, and facilitate that conversation on behalf of the students as well. Because it can be very intimidating for a student to try to talk to a long-term advisor and basically ask them to step down or let them know that the chapter has voted them out. That can be very intimidating to do. So I would expect a section chair to probably get a call to be involved in that conversation for support. Any other questions?
I do have another one, sorry.
Well,
What combination of students, if any, have you seen attend advisory board meetings and/or portions of advisory committee meetings?
So the correct answer would be the chapter president should be attending the advisory board meetings. I think they're supposed to be having them at least annually. I know chapter bylaws might vary from campus to campus, but there should be at least one annual advisory board meeting where the chapter president is attending, because they kind of serve as that ex officio member of the advisory team, just like the advisory chair serves as a non-voting member of the exec board. That's to keep the advisory chair and the chapter president floating between the two committees and making sure there's fluid communication amongst both. But I would also suggest that the section chair be present too. That is just my recommendation, because it helps you get all of the information shared at the same point in time. Everybody gets introduced to each other. You all form a working relationship between the chapter president representing the student voices, the advisor voices are represented, and then you can help bring in the section voices and represent the rest of the fraternity. So in my dream world, that's how an advisory board meeting should happen once a year. But at minimum, it should be the advisory chair with all of the advisors and the chapter president. The more student, and I will also say the more students, the better. So if you had a couple of the VPs come as well, even the treasurer, anybody who has anything to do with the official operations that are due to the national office, I think that helps getting it all done in the same place. But if you have to talk about anything tricky, sometimes you just need the president there. That's a great question. That'll help everybody watching on demand as well. Anything else before we end this presentation? All right, thank you all for attending another one of our advisor development program training courses. This one we focused on recruiting and motivating volunteers in our diamond level course. You can see the rest of them listed here. They will be hosted throughout the rest of the semester and every semester, as well as available on demand. Thank you all for your participation and asking questions and providing input for everybody watching back home on demand. Here is my contact info and our advisor development contacts info. And please, as always, check out the website for more info. Don't forget to fill out your attendance form on the RVC page as well for all the courses you attended. You've made it to the end of our RVC weekend. Thank you all for your service and your time and your dedication, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you.